Here's a question. What is the future of graphics? You see, I've been playing through Bloodborne at the moment, and I'm really enjoying it. The environments and models look phenomenal, the art direction sets a really distinct tone which I find myself encapsulated in. But I remember feeling the same way about other games, and that kind of bummed me out. Not because of the game, mind you. Despite how gloomy Bloodborne is, it was knowing that despite the intentionally darker tone and art direction, the game will probably age pretty poorly. Graphically, at least. But luckily for Bloodborne, mechanics very rarely age. But I feel that graphically this game will be in its prime now, but start to show its crow's feet in a couple of years' time. Graphical power has been constantly pushed forward in the history of video games. And ever since the Atari or NES days where we used our imagination with these digital Lego blocks to see something beyond the CRT scan lines, we've wanted something more. To see the scope of the worlds we explore and the details refined over the years. But sometimes that isn't enough. A lot of games age poorly and straight up look a mess now. Even games that are younger have aged like a raisin in the desert. Art direction is a powerful thing, and a crisp aesthetic can keep a game timeless, even though it may not seem it at the time. Even if I were to say that Bloodborne could pale in comparison to future games, its aesthetic still sets a tone, and it's purely intentional. A drastic contrast in aesthetics to a game like Bloodborne is Zelda the Wind Waker, which still looks better than some realistic shooters that came out years after. Even to the point where Nintendo could just change the lighting engine and upscale the resolution, they were just like, oh damn! And so they reprinted an 11-year-old game. Jumps in graphical power and context to the time is important though. The leap from the Nintendo 64 to the GameCube is a ridiculous comparison, but for many it was the expectations of leaps from different generations. I remember going from Super Mario 64 to Super Smash Bros. Melee and seeing the textures and Mario's overalls, and it just crushing my foundations as a kid. Seeing how Snake has evolved from Metal Gear Solid all the way to the 5th game is astonishing for our standards in realism. But Mortal Kombat, GoldenEye, and Oblivion were once the time-respective benchmark for realistic games, and now those games have aged awfully, while other stylized games look great. Heck, most upscaled GameCube games look amazing, even without the post-processing tools that are in most current games. So are games with a realistic aesthetic doomed to age awfully? Despite the retro 2.5D design of Doom 2, it still looks pretty sleek, and although Doom 3 has more polygons, the game looks pretty rough. It's very rarely that I'm pessimistic, but it's very easy to see that Journey will age a lot better than Doom 4. We craved the day where games would one day be realistic, and now that we're just reaching the end of the uncanny valley, I kind of feel that games are more or less there now. We are reaching closer to that peak, but now there seems to be more of a shift towards performance. Even after reaching the 30-year dream that is the amazing marvel of photorealism, would we still be cynical if it runs on anything less than 60 frames per second? We are at that point where a game's lead role can be played by a blockbuster Hollywood actor. So I'd like to say that we are reaching that cynically titled dead end of realistic graphics. Older style graphics are now an aesthetic choice with the majority of indie titles, being intentionally pixelated or with low poly looks. Making a game with that type of style is a lot more cost effective. And although there are games like Hyper Light Drifter that have a very stylish palette choice, it still isn't very often that you see a game with a refined pixel art that matches that of the Game Boy Advance era. And as much as I love the precision of pixel art, I think that illustrated games like Bastion, Transistor, Braid, Super Meat Boy, and Skullgirls are some of the best looking games I have seen. At least in my opinion. It's an aesthetic choice that just won't age, and the refinement of illustration is timeless, and it isn't as held back by technological limitations. This is important because a distinct aesthetic can evoke feelings in people. It makes you wonder if in 10 years from now, will people be nostalgic towards the adolescent stages of realistic graphics? Embracing that uncanny valley aesthetic of sorts, where character models would look human but not really. Will Steam in its 25 years of summer sales be filled with indie titles inspired by the Xbox 360's era of games, using things like the Unreal 3 engine for authenticity? It's a weird thought. Maybe kids growing up in an era already filled with retro-inspired aesthetics with their Minecrafts and Terrarias, maybe they'll have a nostalgic feeling towards those graphical styles as well. Will our definition of a retro aesthetic just be another way for games to be presented? In 20 years, will the AAA industry be overabundant with photorealistic games that any other type of visual style will be admired for just being different? Well, that sort of mentality has already been around for recent years. There's a lot of questions that come along with this idea. Will graphics as a concept age and be redundant? How will the gaming community adapt and react? Maybe this whole conversation is a bit repetitive. maybe people asked this same question years ago and were just unaware of how much further games could be pushed. For instance, 480p was once considered high definition. Maybe we won't know until it comes, but it's still interesting to think about. I don't know. I'm not a gypsy. I don't have a crystal ball. But I'm interested to know what you think about the whole thing. This is a conversation after all. I don't have all the answers, but I'd like to learn more. Is graphic fidelity still prominent in gaming? In comparison to how the gaming community acted in the 90s and the early 2000s? I don't know. I don't think so. How important is realistic graphics? I mainly ask this because I've never been one to prioritize graphical power when I look at games. Like, if I bought a game because the graphics were great, I feel that I would eventually not love the game anymore. I find myself leaning more towards performance and distinct aesthetics. Are you a part of that shift as well? Do you look forward to the day where you could put on an Oculus Rift and be enveloped in the verisimilitude of a game's universe? Whew, that's a word. Verisimilitude. Regardless of this entire video, do you have a response or an answer for me? You can let me know on my Facebook, Twitter, or just a comment down below. In the meantime, I'm gonna go back to playing Bloodborne. There's a dang guy who's transforming, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of type, and I'm just sick of him. I'm just gonna take him out because it's goddamn fun. Thank you.